Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Her True Stories. This is Alicia Harlow, and today I'm sharing a story that changed everything about the day I was humiliated at my own son's wedding and how I turned that moment into the most satisfying revenge of my life. The chandeliers at Ashford Manor cast dancing shadows across the marble floors as I adjusted my pearl necklace one final time. At 59, I'd learned that true elegance whispers rather than shouts. My silver-gray hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and my navy Chanel dress spoke of refinement without ostentation. After all, today was my son Marcus's wedding day, a day that should have been filled with joy. I had arrived fashionably late, as was my custom. The ceremony had been beautiful, watching my only child marry his college sweetheart, Savannah Pierce. She was 26, blonde, and breathtakingly ambitious. Something about her smile never quite reached her eyes, but Marcus was smitten, and I had learned long ago that a mother's concerns often fall on deaf ears when love is involved. The reception was in full swing when I finally approached the newlyweds' table. The string quartet played softly in the background, and champagne flutes caught the light like liquid diamonds. I carried myself with the grace that had been drilled into me from childhood, back straight, chin high, steps measured and purposeful. "Congratulations, darling," I said warmly to Marcus, kissing his cheek. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, so much like his late father. "And Savannah, welcome to the family." That's when it happened. Savannah's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. "Oh, you're finally here." Her voice carried a tone I'd never heard her use before, sharp, condescending. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming to your own son's wedding." "Of course I would, miss." "Mother wanted to meet you," Savannah interrupted, gesturing toward a woman in an ostentatious gold dress dripping with diamonds. "She's been dying to see what kind of woman raised a son who can't even afford a proper ring." The comment stung, but I maintained my composure. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. My wedding gift to them had been subtle, a trust fund that would mature over time, not flashy jewelry or cars. "I'm sure your mother is lovely," I replied evenly. Savannah's laugh was like breaking glass. "She is. Unlike some people who show up to weddings looking like they can't afford better." Her eyes raked over my classic dress with disgust. "I mean, really, Marcus warned me you weren't exactly wealthy, but I expected you to at least try to look presentable at your son's wedding." The blood rushed to my cheeks, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm sorry if my appearance disappoints you, Savannah." "Oh, it does." She stood up, swaying slightly. Clearly she'd been enjoying the champagne. "In fact, let me give you something to remember this day by." Before I could react, Savannah grabbed a handful of the three-tiered wedding cake, vanilla with buttercream roses, and smashed it directly into my face. The cold frosting dripped down my cheek as gasps echoed around us. Conversation stopped. The string quartet faltered. "There," she said, loud enough for half the reception to hear. "Now you match your outfit. Cheap and messy. I dare you to go talk to my mother now, you beggar. Maybe she'll give you some money for a better dress." The silence was deafening. I could feel every eye in the room on me as buttercream slid down my face and onto my pearls. Marcus sat frozen, his mouth agape. Several guests had their phones out, no doubt capturing this moment for social media immortality. I reached into my purse, withdrew a silk handkerchief, and began calmly wiping the cake from my face. My hands didn't shake. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly controlled. "How thoughtful of you, dear," I said, dabbing at the corners of my mouth. "Though I must say, the cake is a bit sweet for my taste." That's when I heard it, a woman's voice from across the room, sharp and shocked. "Oh my God, that's Alicia Harlow. She owns Harlow Industries. She's worth $3 billion. The woman pointing at me was Victoria Ashford, whose family owned this very estate. We'd met at charity functions years ago, though I'd always kept a low profile about my wealth. The color drained from Savannah's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Around us, whispers erupted like wildfire. 3 billion. Harlow Industries, isn't that the steel empire? She just smashed cake in a billionaire's face? Did you see what she called her? Marcus finally found his voice. Savannah, what have you done? But I wasn't finished. I placed my hand gently on Savannah's shoulder, feeling her tremble beneath my touch. Enjoy your moment, darling, I whispered, loud enough only for her to hear. Some of us prefer to wait for ours. I kissed Marcus on the forehead, nodded politely to the stunned crowd, and walked out of the reception with my head held high, leaving behind a room full of shocked whispers and one very pale bride. As I drove home in my Bentley, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. My late husband had always said, "Never fight fire with fire, Alicia. Smother it with silk." Tonight, I'd been patient. But patience, I was about to discover, could be the sharpest weapon of all. Before we continue, I want to pause and speak directly to anyone listening who has ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. And remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every woman deserves to hear stories that remind her of her own power. Now let's continue with what happened next. The leather seats of my Bentley embraced me like an old friend as I pulled away from Ashford Manor. In the rearview mirror, I could see guests spilling onto the portico, their animated conversations no doubt centered on what they'd just witnessed. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts, but I ignored them all. The drive to my estate took 40 minutes through winding country roads lined with ancient oaks. Normally, I found this journey peaceful, but tonight my mind raced with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The humiliation was still fresh. I could still taste the vanilla buttercream, but beneath it was something else entirely. Something that felt remarkably like anticipation. My home sat on 200 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, a Georgian mansion that had been in my late husband's family for generations. As I passed through the wrought iron gates, motion sensors illuminated the circular drive, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. The fountains bubbled serenely, and my prized rose gardens perfumed the night air. Inside, I went directly to my study, a room that had witnessed countless business deals and family decisions over the years. The walls were lined with first-edition books and family portraits, including one of my husband, William, taken just months before his death 5 years ago. His eyes seemed to follow me as I moved to the antique safe hidden behind a false panel. "Never fight fire with fire, Alicia," I whispered, repeating his favorite saying as I entered the combination. "Smother it with silk." The safe contained more than money or jewelry. Inside were documents that represented decades of careful planning, wills, trust documents, corporate holdings, insurance policies. Everything was meticulously organized in William's neat handwriting and my own careful annotations. I poured myself a glass of Dom Perignon, the same vintage served at the wedding, and settled into William's leather chair to review the family trust documents. Marcus was my only heir, but the trust had been structured with William's business acumen and my natural caution. There were clauses within clauses, protections built upon protections. As I read, my smile grew wider. The main trust was indeed in Marcus's name, but with very specific conditions. Any spouse would have access only to income generated during the marriage, not the principal. In the event of divorce, the spouse would receive nothing. And if Marcus predeceased me, which seemed unlikely given our age difference, everything reverted to blood relatives and selected charities. But more interesting were the discretionary clauses, sections that gave me, as the trust's originator, significant control over disbursements for extraordinary circumstances or threats to family harmony. I'd forgotten about those clauses, added at William's insistence years ago when Marcus was dating a woman we'd suspected was a gold digger. You never know, William had said with his characteristic foresight, what kind of person might try to take advantage of our family's success. How prophetic he'd been. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing every document, making notes, and formulating a plan. By the time I finished, the clock on the mantel chimed 3 in the morning, and I felt more energized than I had in months. Savannah Pierce, now Savannah Harlow, had made a critical error tonight. She'd shown me exactly who she was when she thought I was powerless. More importantly, she'd done it in front of witnesses, creating a narrative that would follow her everywhere. But I wouldn't strike back with the crude weapons she'd used, humiliation and cruelty. No, my retaliation would be far more elegant, far more permanent. It would unfold slowly, like a chess game played by a master against an amateur. I went to bed that night with cake still caught in the clasp of my pearl necklace, but I was smiling. Some women seek revenge hot and fast, but the truly devastating kind? That requires patience, planning, and the kind of resources that Savannah had just discovered I possessed in abundance. Tomorrow, I will begin teaching my new daughter-in-law the difference between old money and new cruelty. And I would savor every single lesson. I woke at dawn, as was my custom, and began my day with meditation in the solarium. The morning light filtered through the glass walls, illuminating my collection of orchids, rare varieties that required patience and precise care to flourish. Rather like revenge, I mused, as I watered a particularly stunning Paphiopedilum that had taken 3 years to bloom. By 8 o'clock, I was in my study, dressed in a cream silk blouse and pearl gray slacks. My hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, and I wore the same pearl earrings I'd inherited from my mother. Understated, elegant, powerful. My first call was to Harrison Bennett, senior partner at Bennett, Clark and Associates, the law firm that had handled the Harlow family affairs for over 30 years. Harrison had been William's Harvard roommate and was one of the few people who truly understood the complexity of our family's financial structure. Alicia, he answered on the first ring. I heard about last night. Victoria Ashford called me at midnight. Apparently the whole thing is already viral on social media. Are you all right?
I'm perfectly fine, Harrison.
In fact, I'm calling because I need to make some adjustments to the family trust. A pause. What kind of adjustments? The discretionary kind. Another pause, longer this time. Harrison knew me well enough to understand that when I spoke in that particular tone, significant changes were coming. I'll be there in an hour, he said. While I waited, I made my second call to my personal assistant, Diane, who had worked for me for 15 years and possessed the remarkable ability to handle any situation with perfect discretion. Good morning, Mrs. Harlow, she answered. I've already seen the videos. Shall I prepare a statement?
No statements.
But I do need you to arrange a few things. First, I want a complete financial background check on Savannah Pierce, now Harlow. Everything. Credit history, shopping habits, debt, family financial status. I want to know where every dollar comes from and where it goes. Of course. Anything else?
Yes.
I want a list of every charity board, country club, and social organization where either she or her mother hold membership or have applied for membership. And I want the contact information for every board chair and membership committee. I'll have that information by tomorrow morning. One more thing, Diane. I want you to arrange lunch with Patricia Whitmore next week. We need to catch up. Patricia Whitmore was the social columnist for Connecticut's most influential lifestyle magazine. She also happened to be my former roommate from Wellesley and someone who understood the importance of maintaining proper social hierarchies. Harrison arrived precisely at 9, carrying his familiar leather briefcase and wearing the concerned expression that had served him well in courtrooms for 4 decades. We settled in my study with coffee served in Wedgwood china. Details mattered, especially now. "Show me exactly what happened," he said, pulling out his legal pad. I recounted the evening's events with clinical precision, watching his eyebrows rise progressively higher as I described Savannah's behavior. "And this was all witnessed," he asked, "by approximately 200 people, including several prominent families. Victoria Ashford, the Kensington clan, the Fairfax family. And, as you mentioned, it's apparently being shared online." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "What exactly do you want to do, Alicia?" I slid the trust documents across the mahogany desk. "I want to activate the discretionary protection clauses. All of them." He flipped through the pages, his legal mind processing the implications. "This would give you significant control over Marcus's inheritance. It would give me the ability to protect our family legacy from someone who has demonstrated a fundamental lack of respect for our values." "The threat to family harmony clause," he mused, reading from the document. "Yes, this could work. But, Alicia, this is nuclear. Once we implement these changes, there's no going back." I stood and walked to the window, looking out over my rose gardens where William and I had planned our future so many years ago. "Harrison, last night I was called a beggar by a woman who married my son for his presumed wealth. She humiliated me in front of our entire social circle because she thought I was powerless to respond. That wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. And you intend to win it." I turned back to face him. "I intend to teach her that in war, the person with the most to lose is rarely the one with the most power." For the next 2 hours, we restructured the family trust with surgical precision. Every disbursement would now require my approval. Marcus would still have access to his trust income, a substantial amount that would allow him to live very comfortably, but any major purchases, investments, or gifts would need my consent. More importantly, we added specific clauses regarding spousal conduct. Any behavior that could be deemed detrimental to the family reputation or contrary to family values could result in reduced distributions or complete suspension of trust benefits. "This is remarkably thorough," Harrison said as he prepared the final documents for my signature. "And perfectly legal." William was brilliant when he insisted on these protective measures. I signed each document with my Mont Blanc pen, the same one I'd used to sign my first business contract 30 years ago. With each signature, I felt a sense of satisfaction that was almost intoxicating. "One more thing," I said as Harrison prepared to leave. "I want these changes to be confidential for now. Marcus doesn't need to know unless circumstances require it." "Understood. Though I should warn you, Savannah will likely discover them eventually, especially if she tries to access any significant funds." I smiled, an expression that had once made competitors in the steel industry very nervous. "Let her try. Some lessons are best learned through experience." After Harrison left, I sat in my study savoring the morning's work. Phase 1 was complete. Savannah had awakened something in me that had been dormant since William's death. The thrill of strategic thinking, of playing a game where the stakes were high and the outcome far from certain. I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey and took it to my private terrace, where I could see the entire estate spread before me. Somewhere out there, Savannah was probably just waking up, perhaps with a hangover from too much champagne, maybe even feeling a bit guilty about her behavior. But not nearly guilty enough. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through social media for the first time in months. The videos were indeed everywhere. Bridezilla humiliates mother-in-law, doesn't know she's a billionaire. The comments were brutal, but not in the way Savannah had intended. That poor woman handled it with such grace. Imagine being that cruel to your husband's mother on your wedding day. Money can't buy class, but it can certainly expose the lack of it. I smiled and put my phone away. The court of public opinion had already begun its deliberation. Now it was time to let the jury reach its verdict. 3 weeks passed before I made my next move. During that time, I maintained my usual routine: morning meditation, afternoon tea in the garden, evening reading in the library. To any observer, I appeared to be the same dignified widow I'd been before the wedding. But beneath the serene surface, I was gathering information and plotting with the patience of a master strategist. Diane's research had been thorough and illuminating. Savannah Pierce came from a middle-class family in Ohio. Her father was a regional insurance manager, her mother a real estate agent. They were comfortable, but far from wealthy. Savannah herself had accumulated significant credit card debt during college and had been working as a marketing coordinator before meeting Marcus at a gallery opening 2 years ago. More interesting were her recent spending patterns. In the months leading up to the wedding, she'd been purchasing items well beyond her means: designer handbags, luxury spa treatments, expensive jewelry. She was clearly anticipating access to what she believed would be Marcus's inheritance. The irony was delicious. My opportunity came on a Thursday afternoon when Marcus called to invite me to lunch. We met at the Ocean View Club, our family's preferred restaurant for 3 generations. The dining room overlooked Long Island Sound, and on clear days like this one, the water sparkled like scattered diamonds. Marcus looked tired, I noticed, as we were seated at our usual table by the window. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there at his wedding. "You look wonderful, Mother," he said, though his smile seemed forced. "I'm glad you could meet me." "Of course, darling. How are you and Savannah settling into married life?" The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Marcus fidgeted with his water glass before answering. "It's an adjustment," he said finally. "Marriage is more complicated than I expected." I nodded sympathetically. All marriages require adaptation. Your father and I certainly had our challenges in the early days. Did you ever feel like you didn't really know Dad before you married him? The question was telling. I chose my words carefully. "I think we all present our best selves during courtship," I said gently. "The real person emerges gradually, in small moments. How we treat service staff, how we handle disappointment, how we behave when we think no one important is watching." Marcus's hand stilled on his glass. "Yes, exactly that." I let the silence stretch, a technique I'd learned in business negotiations. People fill silence with truth when given enough time. "Savannah has been different since the wedding," he said finally. "More demanding. More focused on things that don't seem important to me. Things. Money. Status symbols. She's been talking about upgrading her car, redesigning the apartment, joining expensive clubs. When I told her we should be more careful with spending, she got angry and said I was being cheap-like." He stopped abruptly. "Like?" Marcus looked out at the water. "Like my mother." I felt a flash of anger, but kept my expression neutral. "I see." I tried to explain that you're actually very wealthy, but she laughed and said you were probably just living off life insurance money and would be broke in a few years. "And what did you tell her?" I told her she was wrong, but he shrugged helplessly. "She said you dress like you shop at discount stores and drive an old car." My Bentley was 3 years old, and my classic style had been cultivated over decades. But I could see how someone obsessed with flashy displays of wealth might misinterpret understated elegance. "What else troubles you, Marcus?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She's been going out more at night. Girls' nights, she says, but she comes home very late and won't tell me where she's been. And there are credit card charges I don't recognize. Expensive restaurants, nightclubs. When I ask her about them, she says I'm being controlling." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Marriage requires trust, darling. But it also requires transparency. I know. It's just. He looked at me with the same expression he'd worn as a child when he'd broken something precious and was afraid to confess. I'm starting to think I married someone I don't actually know. The admission hung between us like a confession. I could have offered comfort, could have reassured him that all marriages go through difficult periods. Instead, I chose a different path. Trust your instincts, Marcus, I said gently. You've always had good judgment about people. Don't let anyone convince you to ignore what your heart is telling you. We finished lunch talking about safer topics. His work, my garden plans for the upcoming holidays. But I could see the seeds of doubt taking root in his mind. He was beginning to question not just Savannah's behavior, but her motivations for marrying him in the first place. After he left, I remained at the table, sipping my tea and watching the boats drift across the Sound. I hadn't lied to him. He did have good judgment about people. He'd always been able to see through false friends and social climbers. But love, as his father used to say, could make even the wisest person temporarily blind. The blindness, however, was beginning to fade. That evening, I called Patricia Whitmore to confirm our lunch appointment for the following week. Patricia's column, Society's Mirror, was read religiously by everyone who mattered in Connecticut's social hierarchy. A mention in her column could make or break reputations, determine club memberships, and influence charity board appointments. I'm so looking forward to catching up, Patricia said. And I must say, you handled that dreadful situation at the Ashford wedding with remarkable grace. The whole thing was absolutely shocking. Thank you, Patricia. It was certainly unexpected. I hope you won't mind if I ask about it over lunch. I'm writing a piece about the importance of maintaining dignity in challenging social situations. You'd be the perfect example. Of course, I agreed, though we both knew that wasn't really what she wanted to discuss. After I hung up, I went to my study and pulled out a leather journal, one of many I'd kept over the years to record important business decisions and personal reflections. Tonight's entry was brief. The foundation has been laid. Marcus is beginning to see the truth on his own, which is far more powerful than any revelation I could provide. Some truths must be discovered, not told. Patience remains my greatest weapon. I closed the journal and placed it back in the drawer, next to similar volumes dating back to my early days in business. Each one documented the careful planning and strategic thinking that had helped build the Harlow fortune. This journal, I suspected, would contain the most satisfying campaign of all. Patricia Whitmore hadn't changed much in the 30 years since our Wellesley days. Her auburn hair was now professionally colored to hide the gray, and her figure was maintained through twice-weekly Pilates sessions, but her sharp eyes and sharper instincts remained exactly as I remembered. We met at Le Bernardin in Manhattan, a neutral location where we could speak freely without running into Connecticut social circles. Patricia ordered the Dover sole. I chose the lobster salad. We caught up on mutual friends and family news over the first course, but I could see her journalistic instincts stirring beneath her pleasant smile. Now then, she said as our entrees arrived, tell me about this daughter-in-law of yours. Savannah is spirited, I said carefully, echoing the same measured tone I'd used with Marcus. She has very strong opinions about how things should be done. Patricia leaned forward. Alicia, I've known you for 3 decades. You don't do anything without careful consideration, including agreeing to this lunch. What's really going on? I smiled at her directness. It was one of the qualities that had made her such a successful columnist. I'm concerned about certain social standards being compromised, such as the way people treat those they perceive as less fortunate, the importance of grace under pressure, the difference between confidence and cruelty. Patricia's pen moved across her notepad with practiced ease. Are we talking about anyone in particular? I'm simply observing that some people mistake kindness for weakness and assume that quiet dignity indicates a lack of power or resources. And how do you think such misunderstandings should be corrected? I took a sip of my Chablis before answering. I believe society has its own way of maintaining balance. Good behavior is rewarded, poor behavior has consequences. The challenge is ensuring that the right people have the right information to make informed decisions. Patricia understood perfectly. By the time we finished lunch, she had everything she needed for her column, though she would present it as a thoughtful piece about maintaining social graces in an increasingly coarse world. More importantly, she now knew exactly what kind of person Savannah Pierce Harlow was. The column appeared the following Thursday under the headline Grace Under Fire, a masterclass in dignity. While my name was never mentioned, anyone who had attended the wedding would recognize the incident Patricia described with such eloquent disapproval. The piece became one of her most shared columns of the year. But the real work happened behind the scenes. Over the following weeks, I began making subtle contact with the membership committees of various organizations where Savannah had applied or expressed interest. My approach was never direct. I simply renewed old friendships, attended charity luncheons I'd previously declined, and resumed my place in social circles where I'd maintained a lower profile since William's death. The Greenwich Country Club was first. Savannah had submitted an application for membership, sponsored by Marcus, who had been a member since college. I happened to encounter Margaret Fairfax, the membership committee chair, at a hospital fundraiser. "Alicia, how lovely to see you out and about again," Margaret said warmly. "We've missed you at the club events." "I'm thinking of becoming more socially active again," I replied. William always said isolation wasn't healthy, and I think he was right. We chatted about mutual friends and upcoming events before Margaret mentioned, almost casually, "I believe your new daughter-in-law has applied for membership." "Has she? How interesting." "We're still reviewing applications, of course. The committee takes character references very seriously." I nodded thoughtfully. Character is so important in maintaining the club standards. "I'm sure you'll make the right decision." The conversation lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but Margaret left with a clear understanding of my feelings about Savannah's application. 2 weeks later, Savannah received a polite rejection letter citing current membership capacity limitations. The Harbor Yacht Club followed a similar pattern, as did the Junior League Auxiliary Board. Each rejection was delivered with impeccable politeness and plausible explanations that had nothing to do with character concerns. But the cumulative effect was devastating to someone who had planned to climb the social ladder through marriage. The Art Gallery Board was particularly satisfying. Savannah had attended several openings, clearly attempting to position herself as a patron of the arts. When she applied for the junior board of the Metropolitan Arts Council, her application was reviewed by a committee that included 3 of my longtime acquaintances. "I just don't think she quite fits our vision," Elizabeth Kensington confided to me over tea. "There's something rather grasping about her. She seems more interested in being seen as cultured than in actually supporting the arts." "How unfortunate," I murmured. "Though I suppose not everyone understands that true patronage requires genuine passion rather than social ambition."
Exactly.
"You understand these things, Alicia. You always have." Meanwhile, Diane's research had uncovered something else interesting. Savannah's credit card debt was growing rapidly. The expensive purchases had continued after the wedding, funded by cards in her own name. She was clearly expecting access to family money that, unknown to her, was no longer available in the way she'd assumed. The pressure was beginning to show. Marcus mentioned during our weekly phone calls that Savannah had become increasingly irritable about their social invitations, or rather, the lack of them. Doors that she'd expected to open were remaining firmly closed. "She keeps saying that people are snubbing us," Marcus told me during one conversation. "She thinks it's because of what happened at the wedding, but I don't understand why that would matter so much. It was just one incident." Some people have long memories, I said gently, and first impressions can be very difficult to overcome. But it's affecting her so much. She's been drinking more, and she gets angry over the smallest things. Last night she threw a crystal vase because an invitation she was expecting didn't arrive. I felt a flicker of genuine concern for my son, mixed with satisfaction at Savannah's mounting frustration. The social freeze was working exactly as intended, creating pressure that would eventually force her true nature into the open. Perhaps she needs time to adjust her expectations, I suggested. Maybe. Though I'm starting to wonder if her expectations were realistic to begin with. Another seed of doubt, taking root and beginning to grow. That evening, I stood on my terrace with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. In the distance, I could see the lights of the yacht club where Savannah would never be welcome, the country club where she would never play tennis, the social circles where she would forever remain an outsider. Some people mistake kindness for weakness, I thought, remembering my conversation with Patricia. But they rarely make that mistake twice. The first phase of my campaign was complete. Savannah's social ambitions lay in ruins, her expectations shattered against the invisible but impenetrable barriers of old money and established relationships. But I was far from finished. True revenge, like fine wine, required time to reach its full potential. And I had all the time in the world. By autumn, Savannah's frustration had metastasized into paranoia. Marcus reported that she'd become obsessed with social media, constantly monitoring who was attending events she hadn't been invited to, screenshotting photos of gatherings she'd been excluded from. The woman who had once been confident to the point of cruelty was now seeing slights and conspiracies everywhere, which made my next phase considerably easier to execute. The key to successful manipulation, I'd learned during my years in business, was to let your target's own insecurities do most of the work. I didn't need to spread malicious gossip about Savannah. I simply needed to ensure that her own behavior created the narrative I wanted. It began with Ashley Morrison, a 24-year-old socialite whose primary occupation was lunch and whose greatest talent was gossip. Ashley was the kind of person who could make or break reputations simply through her presence at the right gatherings. She was also deeply impressed by wealth and desperate for acceptance from older, more established society women. I encountered Ashley at a charity fashion show, one of the few public events I'd begun attending again. She approached me during intermission, her eyes bright with a kind of calculated friendliness that screamed social ambition. "Mrs. Harlow, I'm Ashley Morrison. I just wanted to say how much I admired how you handled that awful situation at the Ashford wedding. You were absolutely gracious."
Thank you, dear.
Though I prefer not to dwell on unpleasant incidents. Of course, but still, the way you just walked away with such dignity. I could never have managed it. I studied her for a moment, recognizing something useful in her eager-to-please demeanor. "You know, Ashley, I think you might be exactly what I need." "What do you mean?" "I'm looking for someone to help me re-enter social circles. Someone young and energetic who knows all the right people. Would you be interested in coordinating some small gatherings for me? Nothing elaborate, just intimate dinner parties for interesting people." Ashley's face lit up like Christmas morning. The chance to plan events for Alicia Harlow, to be associated with one of Connecticut's wealthiest families, was beyond her wildest social climbing dreams. "I would be honored," she breathed. "Wonderful. We'll start with something small next month. Perhaps 8 people, just a quiet dinner party to celebrate my return to entertaining." What Ashley didn't realize was that she was about to become my most effective weapon against Savannah. The dinner party was held 3 weeks later in my dining room, illuminated by Waterford crystal chandeliers and set with Spode china that had been in William's family for generations. The guest list was carefully curated, 6 people who mattered in Connecticut society, plus Ashley and myself. Conversation flowed as smoothly as the Dom Perignon, and by the third course, I had steered the discussion exactly where I wanted it. "I must say, Alicia," commented Victoria Ashford, "it's wonderful to have you entertaining again. We've missed your gatherings." "Thank you, Victoria. I've missed them too. Though I must admit, I'm being more selective about my guest list these days." "Oh?" This from Caroline Pemberton, whose husband sat on half the charity boards in the state. "I've learned that not everyone appreciates the subtleties of proper social interaction," I said with a slight smile. "Some people seem to think that marriage into a family automatically grants them access to all social privileges, regardless of their behavior." Ashley leaned forward eagerly. "Are you talking about people who don't understand social etiquette?" "Precisely. For instance, there are those who assume that loud criticism of others will somehow elevate their own status, or who mistake aggression for confidence." The table murmured agreement. These were people who had been raised on the principles of discretion and grace, the kind of behavior Savannah had violated so spectacularly. "It's particularly sad," I continued, "when someone is clearly out of their depth but refuses to learn from those who could help them. Pride, I suppose, prevents them from accepting guidance." "How exhausting that must be for the family," Caroline observed. "Indeed. Though one hopes that time and experience will provide the education that upbringing apparently didn't." By the end of the evening, Ashley was practically vibrating with excitement. She'd been included in an intimate gathering of Connecticut's elite, had heard delicious gossip about unnamed but clearly identifiable people, and had been positioned as my unofficial social coordinator. More importantly, she now had stories to tell. Over the following weeks, Ashley became my unwitting ambassador, spreading carefully crafted narratives about exclusivity, social standards, and the importance of proper behavior. She began hosting her own gatherings, smaller affairs where she could share insider knowledge about why certain people were no longer welcome in certain circles. By the end of the evening, Ashley was practically vibrating with excitement. She'd been included in an intimate gathering of Connecticut's elite, had heard delicious gossip about unnamed but clearly identifiable people, and had been positioned as my unofficial social coordinator. More importantly, she now had stories to tell. Over the following weeks, Ashley became my unwitting ambassador, spreading carefully crafted narratives about exclusivity, social standards, and the importance of proper behavior. She began hosting her own gatherings, smaller affairs where she could share insider knowledge about why certain people were no longer welcome in certain circles. The genius of this approach was that Ashley never mentioned Savannah by name. She simply discussed, in general terms, the consequences of poor social judgment and the importance of maintaining standards. But anyone who had witnessed the wedding incident knew exactly who she was talking about. Savannah, meanwhile, was spiraling. She'd taken to attending public events where she couldn't be excluded: art gallery openings, charity fundraisers, public lectures. But her desperation was palpable, and desperation has a particular odor that sophisticated people can detect from across a room. "She's become so intense," Marcus confided during one of our dinners. "Last week she cornered Patricia Whitmore at a museum opening and demanded to know why she wasn't being invited to better events. Patricia was polite, but I could see she was uncomfortable." "That must have been embarrassing for you."
It was mortifying.
"And Savannah got angry at me afterward, saying I should have supported her more."
But what was I supposed to say?
"You can't demand social invitations." "No," I agreed. "They must be earned." The credit card situation was also deteriorating. Diane's monthly report showed that Savannah's debt had grown to over $60,000, spread across multiple cards. She was maintaining her lifestyle through borrowing, clearly expecting that access to family money would eventually solve her problems. What she didn't know was that every significant purchase now required my approval under the discretionary clauses Harrison had so cleverly activated. When she applied for a joint credit card with Marcus, the application was denied due to the trust's restrictions on family debt obligations. I don't understand, Marcus told me after another tense conversation with his wife. The bank said something about trust provisions preventing joint financial obligations. What does that mean? It means the trust is protecting your interests, I said carefully. Your father was very concerned about fortune hunters who might try to access family money through marriage. Fortune hunters? Marcus looked stricken. You don't think Savannah? I placed my hand on his arm gently. I think your father was wise to include protections, regardless of circumstances. Trusts are designed to preserve wealth across generations, not to insult anyone's intentions. But the seed was planted, and I could see it taking root alongside all the others I'd sown over the past months. The final piece of this phase came together at Thanksgiving. Savannah had been planning an elaborate dinner party to showcase her role as the newest Harlow family hostess. She'd sent invitations to all the right people, ordered expensive flowers and catering, and planned a menu that would have impressed a five-star restaurant. The problem was almost no one came. Marcus called me the day after Thanksgiving, his voice hollow with embarrassment. Mother, I don't know what happened. We had RSVPs from 20 people, but only 6 showed up. Savannah spent thousands of dollars on that dinner, and we ended up with enough food for an army and almost no guests. Perhaps people had other commitments, I suggested gently, but they confirmed they were coming. Some of them didn't even call to cancel, they just didn't show up. Savannah was humiliated. She's been in our bedroom crying for 2 days. I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy, quickly replaced by the memory of buttercream frosting dripping down my face. I'm sorry it was such a disappointment, darling. She keeps saying that people are deliberately avoiding us, that there's some kind of conspiracy against her. But that's crazy, right? People don't actually do things like that. The innocence in his voice was heartbreaking. My son had been raised with privilege, but also with kindness. He simply couldn't fathom the intricate social warfare that his mother had mastered over decades in business and society. People can be unpredictable, I said diplomatically. Perhaps next time a smaller, more intimate gathering would be better. But we both knew there wouldn't be a next time. Savannah's reputation as a hostess was finished before it had really begun, destroyed by her own behavior and my careful orchestration of consequences. That night, I sat in my study reviewing Diane's latest report on Savannah's activities. The picture it painted was of a woman increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate, and increasingly prone to public displays of frustration that only further damaged her reputation. The social freeze was complete. Savannah had been effectively exiled from the circles she'd hoped to conquer, not through any dramatic confrontation, but through the quiet, inexorable pressure of disapproval and exclusion. But I wasn't finished. Isolation was just the beginning. The next phase would require Savannah to destroy herself completely, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. Some lessons, after all, could only be taught through experience. December brought the first real test of my carefully laid plans. Savannah, desperate to understand why her social ambitions had crumbled so completely, hired a lawyer to investigate her legal rights as a Harlow family member. It was exactly the move I'd been anticipating, and the one that would expose just how little power she actually possessed. The lawyer she chose was Jonathan Morse, a mid-tier attorney who specialized in matrimonial law and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Not the kind of sophisticated legal mind who would understand the subtle complexities of family trust structures, but exactly the type who would give Savannah the answers she wanted to hear, at least initially. Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice tight with stress. Mother, Savannah has hired a lawyer. She wants to understand her rights regarding the family trust. That's certainly her prerogative, I said calmly, though my heart was racing with anticipation. What exactly is she hoping to learn? She believes that you've somehow blocked her access to family money. William's trust is ironclad, and every provision was legally sound when implemented. How long will the review take? I've sent him the relevant documents. Based on what I've provided, I'd estimate he'll need about a week to realize his client has no legal standing whatsoever. And then he'll have to deliver some very disappointing news. I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. The trust that William had so carefully structured was about to prove its worth in ways neither of us had fully anticipated. The revelation came on a Friday afternoon. Marcus arrived at my house unannounced, looking haggard and defeated. I found him standing in my foyer, still wearing his coat, staring at the family portrait that dominated the entrance hall. "She knows," he said without preamble. "Knows what, darling?" "About the trust. About the restrictions. About all of it." I led him to the library, where a fire was crackling in the marble fireplace. He slumped into William's old leather chair and buried his face in his hands. "Tell me what happened," I said gently. "Her lawyer called this morning. Apparently, the trust is structured so that spouses have virtually no rights to family assets. She can't access the principal, can't make major financial decisions, can't even co-sign for significant loans without your approval. Your father was very thorough in protecting the family legacy." Marcus looked up at me with eyes that reminded me painfully of William's. "But it's more than that, isn't it? The discretionary clauses, they give you control over almost everything. If you decided I was making poor choices, you could essentially cut off all family support." I chose my words carefully. The trust was designed to protect against threats to family harmony and reputation. Your father believed that preserving our values was as important as preserving our wealth. And you think Savannah threatens those values? It wasn't a question. Marcus had finally connected all the dots I'd been laying out for months. "I think your father would have had serious concerns about someone who publicly humiliated his wife and called her a beggar." Marcus flinched, as if I'd slapped him. "You've known all along about the restrictions, about what it would mean for her. You've been watching her fail, knowing she had no real access to family money. I've been protecting what your father spent his lifetime building. By destroying my marriage, the accusation hung between us like a sword." For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt, a maternal instinct to comfort my son regardless of the cost. Then I remembered the taste of vanilla buttercream and the sound of laughter as I walked away from my own son's wedding with my dignity in ruins. "Your marriage is destroying itself," I said quietly. "I'm simply ensuring that when it does, our family's legacy remains intact." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing everything: the social rejections, the financial restrictions, the carefully orchestrated isolation of his wife. "She accused me of knowing," he said finally, "of being part of some conspiracy against her. When I told her I had no idea about the trust provisions, she called me a liar." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I knew you were wealthy, but I'd never concerned myself with the details of inheritance because I never expected it to matter during your lifetime. That I married her because I loved her, not because of what she might gain from our family." "And how did she respond?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "She accused me of being naive. Said that no one marries into a billionaire family without understanding the financial implications. She actually said that she'd done her research, that she knew exactly what she was supposed to gain by marrying me." The admission must have been devastating for him. The revelation that his wife had viewed their marriage as a business transaction rather than a love story. "You deserved better than that." Did I? Or did I deserve exactly what I got for being foolish enough to ignore all the warning signs? We sat in silence for several minutes, the fire crackling and shadows dancing on the walls. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "What happens now?" "That depends on what you want to happen. I want my wife to love me for who I am, not for what she thinks I can give her. But I'm beginning to realize that might not be possible." The defeat in his voice was heartbreaking, but also necessary. Some illusions had to be shattered completely before reality could take their place. Love built on false foundations rarely survives the truth, I said gently. Marcus nodded slowly. She's talking about going back to Ohio for Christmas. To think about our future, she says. But I think she's really going to discuss her options with her family. That might be for the best. Sometimes distance provides clarity. After Marcus left, I poured myself a glass of wine and returned to the library. The revelation phase was complete. Savannah now understood the true scope of her situation, and more importantly, so did Marcus. But understanding and acceptance were two different things. Savannah was facing the collapse of everything she'd thought her marriage would provide, and desperate people often made dangerous choices. I suspected the final phase of this drama was about to begin, and it would be the most difficult for everyone involved. But like a surgeon removing a malignant tumor, sometimes the most painful treatment was the only one that could save what mattered most. I raised my glass in a silent toast to William's portrait above the fireplace. His foresight was about to be vindicated in the most complete way possible. Savannah didn't go to Ohio for Christmas. Instead, she embarked on what could only be described as a campaign of self-destruction so thorough that I couldn't have orchestrated it better if I'd tried. It began with shopping. Lots of shopping. Diane's report showed a spending spree that bordered on manic: designer handbags, jewelry, shoes, clothing, all charged to credit cards that were already maxed out. When those were declined, she opened new accounts, using her status as a Harlow family member to secure additional credit. The irony was exquisite. She was using the family name to accumulate debt that the family trust would never allow Marcus to help her pay. Marcus called me on New Year's Eve, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "She's completely lost control," he said. "Yesterday, I found shopping bags hidden in our closet, thousands of dollars worth of things she can't possibly afford. When I confronted her about it, she said it was an investment in our social image." An investment? She claims that if she looks successful enough, people will eventually accept her back into their circles. She's convinced that her social problems are just a temporary misunderstanding that can be fixed with the right wardrobe. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "And how are you handling this?" "I'm not sure I am handling it. She's been drinking more, a lot more. Last week she showed up to lunch with the wives of my business associates and was clearly intoxicated by dessert. Jennifer Walsh called me afterward to check if everything was all right." Jennifer Walsh was the wife of Marcus's business partner, a woman whose opinion carried significant weight in their professional circles. If Savannah was embarrassing herself in front of Jennifer, word would spread quickly through the business community.
"I'm sorry, darling."
That must have been very embarrassing. It was mortifying. And when I tried to talk to Savannah about it, she accused me of being ashamed of her. She said that if I really loved her, I'd find a way to give her the lifestyle she deserves. The lifestyle she deserves? Unlimited access to family money, a house in the Hamptons, membership in all the exclusive clubs. She has a whole list of things she considers basic requirements for being married to a Harlow. The entitlement was breathtaking, even by Savannah's standards. She'd gone from trying to climb the social ladder to demanding that it be lowered to meet her. But the shopping and drinking weren't the worst of it. That honor belonged to what Diane discovered during her routine monitoring of Savannah's activities. "Mrs. Harlow," Diane said during our weekly meeting, "I need to show you something concerning." She handed me a series of photographs taken at various Manhattan nightclubs over the past month. In each one, Savannah was clearly visible, laughing and dancing with groups of people I didn't recognize. More troubling were the photos that showed her in intimate conversation with men who were definitely not her husband. "She's been going out 3 or 4 nights a week," Diane reported. "Always to upscale venues in Manhattan, always spending money she doesn't have. The credit card receipts show bar tabs of several $100s per night." Is Marcus aware of this? I don't believe so. She tells him she's attending cultural events or meeting with potential social contacts. But these venues. Diane shook her head. These aren't places someone goes to make connections in Connecticut society. I studied the photographs more carefully. Savannah looked different in them, harder somehow, more desperate. The elegant facade she'd maintained during courtship had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. Continue monitoring, I instructed. But be discreet. We don't want to create a situation that could compromise Marcus unnecessarily. The situation was beginning to escalate beyond my careful control, and that made me nervous. I'd wanted to expose Savannah's true nature, not drive her to complete self-destruction. There was a difference between justice and cruelty, and I'd never intended to cross that line. My concerns proved justified when Marcus called me at midnight on a Thursday, his voice shaking with emotion. "Mother, I need your help." "What's wrong?" "Savannah, she didn't come home tonight. She said she was going to a museum lecture, but when I called the museum, they said there was no event scheduled. I've been trying to reach her for hours." "Have you contacted the police?" "Not yet. I was hoping, could you ask Diane to help find her? She seems to know how to locate people." Within 2 hours, Diane had tracked Savannah to a trendy nightclub in Soho, where security cameras showed her leaving at 1:30 a.m. with a man I didn't recognize. She didn't return home until the following afternoon, offering no explanation beyond claiming she'd stayed at a friend's apartment because she was too tired to drive. The lie was so transparent that even Marcus, who had been making excuses for his wife for months, couldn't ignore it. "She's having an affair," he told me over dinner the following week. "I know it. She knows I know it, but she keeps denying it." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to confront her, demand the truth. But another part of me—" He trailed off, staring at his untouched plate. "Another part of you what?" "Another part of me wonders if I care anymore." "Is that terrible? I feel like I've been trying to save a marriage to someone who doesn't actually exist. The woman I fell in love with was kind, ambitious in a healthy way, interested in building something together. This person—" He gestured helplessly. "I don't even know who this person is." The sadness in his voice was heartbreaking, but also liberating. Marcus was finally ready to see the truth that had been obvious to everyone else for months. "People show us who they really are when they're under pressure," I said gently. "Perhaps this is simply who Savannah has always been, and you're seeing it clearly for the first time." "Then I've made a terrible mistake." "Not a mistake, darling. A learning experience. The question now is what you're going to do with what you've learned." "Not a mistake, darling. A learning experience. The question now is what you're going to do with what you've learned." But Marcus wasn't ready to answer that question yet. Like many people faced with the collapse of their fundamental assumptions, he needed more time to process the reality of his situation. Savannah, meanwhile, was providing him with plenty of additional evidence to consider. The following weekend, she attended a charity gala without him, claiming he was too busy with work to accompany her. According to Ashley Morrison's breathless report, delivered during one of our regular coffee meetings, Savannah had consumed too much champagne and made a scene when she wasn't seated at one of the premium tables. She actually approached Mrs. Pemberton and demanded to know why she wasn't considered worthy of better placement, Ashley whispered with barely contained glee. Mrs. Pemberton was mortified. Security had to escort her out. The incident would be reported in Patricia Whitmore's column the following week, though Savannah's name would be discreetly omitted. But everyone who mattered would know exactly who had violated such basic social protocols. By February, Savannah's public behavior had become so erratic that people were beginning to whisper about intervention and mental health concerns. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to force her way into society's upper echelons, she'd made herself a cautionary tale about the dangers of social climbing without substance. But I took no pleasure in watching her spiral. What had begun as measured justice had become something uglier, more desperate. Savannah was destroying herself with a thoroughness that exceeded even my most ambitious plans for revenge. Perhaps it was time to consider mercy. Or perhaps it was already too late for such considerations. The end came, as these things often do, at the most public possible moment. It was the annual Heart Foundation Gala at the Waldorf Astoria, Connecticut's premier charity event of the spring social season. I had purchased a table, as I did every year, and invited carefully selected companions, Victoria Ashford, the Kensington family, and several other pillars of proper society. Marcus had declined to attend, citing work commitments, though I suspected he simply couldn't bear the thought of managing Savannah's behavior at such a high-profile event. Savannah, however, had other plans. I was enjoying the cocktail reception, discussing the evening's auction items with Victoria, when I spotted her across the room. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, red silk, figure-hugging, with jewelry that sparkled under the chandeliers. Beautiful, certainly, but entirely inappropriate for a charity gala where understatement was the highest form of elegance. "Is that your daughter-in-law?" Victoria asked, following my gaze. "Yes, it is." "She looks determined." That was one way to put it. Savannah was moving through the crowd with the focused intensity of someone on a mission, her smile too bright, her laugh too loud. I could see the subtle shifts as people noticed her approach, the way conversations faltered, how groups seemed to close ranks almost imperceptibly. She made her way to our group with the inevitability of a force of nature. "Alicia," she said, air-kissing my cheek with theatrical affection. "How wonderful to see you here. You look lovely."
Thank you, Savannah.
"How nice that you could attend." Up close, I could see the telltale signs I'd learned to recognize over the past months. The slight tremor in her hands, the two bright eyes that suggested she'd been drinking during the cocktail hour, the brittle quality to her smile that spoke of barely controlled desperation. "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, her voice carrying just a bit too much volume. "After all, charitable giving is so important for families like ours. Don't you think, Victoria?" Victoria Ashford, who had witnessed Savannah's humiliation of me at the wedding, simply nodded politely and excused herself to speak with someone across the room. But Savannah wasn't finished. As the evening progressed, she seemed to grow more agitated. During dinner, I watched her work her way around the room, approaching various tables and attempting to insert herself into conversations. Each interaction lasted a bit shorter than the last, and each rejection, for they were rejections, however politely delivered, seemed to fuel her mounting frustration. The breaking point came during the auction portion of the evening. I had just successfully bid on a week at a Tuscan villa, donating $50,000 to the Heart Foundation, when Savannah suddenly stood up from her table across the room. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the polite applause that had followed my bid. "Excuse me, but I have something to say." The auctioneer paused, microphone in hand, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected interruption. Around the ballroom, conversation stopped as 500 of Connecticut's most influential people turned to stare at the woman in the red dress. "I want everyone to know," Savannah continued, swaying slightly as she spoke, "that I am Savannah Harlow, Mrs. Marcus Harlow. And despite what some people in this room might think, I belong here just as much as anyone else." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was beyond social faux pas. It was a complete violation of every unspoken rule that governed events like this. "Furthermore," she said, her voice growing louder and more slurred, "I'm tired of being treated like some kind of social pariah just because certain people," her eyes found mine across the room, "can't accept that their sons have grown up and made their own choices about who to marry." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every eye in the room shifting between Savannah and me, waiting to see how this unprecedented scene would unfold. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy Armani gown, and walked calmly to the podium where the auctioneer stood frozen. Without asking permission, I took the microphone from his hand. "Thank you, Savannah," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I appreciate your passion for family relationships." A few nervous chuckles from the audience. "But if I may," I continued, "I'd like to remind everyone why we're here tonight. We're gathered to support the Heart Foundation, an organization that has funded life-saving cardiac research for over 30 years." Applause began tentatively, then grew stronger as people recognized that I was attempting to salvage the evening's dignity. "In my experience," I said, looking directly at Savannah, "the strongest hearts are often the quietest ones. They don't need to announce their worth. They simply demonstrate it through their actions, their consistency, and their commitment to others." The applause was building now, and I could see Savannah's face reddening as she realized that her dramatic gesture had backfired completely. Tonight, this room is filled with people who embody those values. People who understand that true strength comes not from demanding recognition, but from earning it. People who know that charity, like love, is something you give freely, not something you use to purchase acceptance. The standing ovation began at my table and spread throughout the room like wildfire. 500 people were on their feet, applauding not just my words, but the grace with which I'd handled an impossible situation. Savannah stood frozen in the middle of it all, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and fled from the ballroom, leaving behind a room full of people who would remember this moment for years to come. I handed the microphone back to the auctioneer, who managed to restore order and continue with the evening's program. But the damage was done, not to me, but to Savannah. She had publicly revealed herself to be exactly what I'd always known she was, someone who confused volume with strength, drama with dignity. The videos began appearing on social media within hours. "Billionaire's Grace Under Pressure," read one headline. "How to Handle a Public Meltdown with Class," read another. By morning, the incident had been shared thousands of times, with commentary universally praising my composure and criticizing Savannah's behavior. Marcus called me at 7 a.m., his voice hollow with shame. "I saw the videos," he said simply. "I'm so sorry, Mother, for everything." "You have nothing to apologize for, darling." "Don't I? I brought her into our family. I ignored all the warning signs because I thought I was in love. I let her humiliate you. Not once, but twice now. You learned something important about the person you married. That's not a failure. It's wisdom gained through experience." A long pause. "She hasn't come home. Do you want her to?" Another pause, even longer. "No," he said finally. "I don't think I do." The transformation was complete. The son who had been too blinded by infatuation to see his wife's true nature was finally ready to acknowledge what everyone else had known for months. Justice, I reflected, had many faces. But the most satisfying kind was always self-inflicted. Spring came early that year, and with it, a sense of renewal that I hadn't felt since William's death. The daffodils in my garden bloomed magnificently, and I spent my mornings tending to them while sipping coffee from my favorite Limoges cup, small pleasures that reminded me that life could still offer beauty after difficult chapters. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday in April, delivered by Harrison Bennett himself rather than by courier. He found me in my rose garden, where I was pruning the climbers that would soon burst into their full glory. "It's finished," he said simply, handing me the leather portfolio. I set down my pruning shears and opened the documents, scanning the settlement terms with the same attention I'd once given to corporate contracts. The prenuptial agreement that Savannah had so cavalierly signed 2 years ago had proven its worth. She would receive nothing beyond what she'd brought into the marriage. The family trust remained intact, untouched by her grasping ambitions. She signed without contest? I asked. Her lawyer advised her that any challenge would be futile and expensive. Given her current financial situation, she couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle anyway. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been pity. Where is she now? Back in Ohio, from what I understand. Living with her parents while she reassesses her options. The woman who had called me a beggar was now dependent on her middle-class parents for basic support. The irony wasn't lost on me, though I took no particular pleasure in it. Revenge, I discovered, was most satisfying when it was earned rather than merely inflicted. And Marcus. He seems relieved, honestly. I think the past few months showed him exactly what kind of person he'd married. The drinking, the spending, the public scenes, it all painted a rather clear picture. Indeed it had. Savannah had destroyed herself more thoroughly than I ever could have managed, revealing her character with a precision that made my own machinations seem almost unnecessary in retrospect. That evening, Marcus came for dinner, our first private meal together since the divorce proceedings began. He looked younger somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Over my cook's famous cocoa vin, we talked about his work, his plans for the future, and carefully avoided discussing his failed marriage. It wasn't until dessert that he finally broached the subject that had been hanging between us for months. "I know what you did," he said quietly, setting down his coffee cup. My hand stilled on my napkin. "What do you mean?" "The social exile. The trust restrictions. The way you systematically dismantled her support network. I know it wasn't just coincidence." For a moment, I considered denying it, maintaining the fiction that Savannah had simply self-destructed without any assistance from me. But Marcus deserved better than lies, especially now. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that question honestly. Because she humiliated me in front of everyone we knew, and because I could see that she was going to destroy you, if given the chance. Because sometimes mothers have to protect their children from their own poor judgment. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the twilight settling over the garden. "I should be angry with you," he said finally. "Yes, you probably should. But I'm not. Because you were right about her. About everything." Relief flooded through me. Relief that my son could forgive my manipulation, that he understood why I'd felt compelled to act. "I never wanted to hurt you, Marcus. I only wanted to protect what matters most." "I know. And I understand why you felt you had to do it that way. If you'd simply told me your concerns, I would have defended her. I had to see the truth for myself. Your father always said that the most important lessons can't be taught, they have to be experienced." Marcus smiled sadly. He was right about a lot of things, wasn't he? Including the trust provisions. I used to think they were paranoid, but now you understand that protecting a legacy isn't just about money. It's about values, character, the kind of people we allow into our inner circle. We finished dinner in comfortable silence, two people who had weathered a storm and emerged with their relationship not just intact but stronger. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "What will you do now?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "You've spent months orchestrating Savannah's downfall. Now that it's over, what's next for the mastermind?" I laughed at his description. "I think I'll return to what I do best, being your mother and enjoying my garden." Though perhaps with a bit more appreciation for both. After he left, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks, the simple domestic rituals that marked the end of another day. In my study, I paused before William's portrait, as I did every night. "She called me a beggar," I whispered to his painted image. But in the end, she was the one left with nothing. I opened the leather journal, where I'd been recording this strange chapter of my life, and wrote the final entry. Justice served. Legacy protected. Family restored. Some battles are won not through force, but through patience and the simple act of allowing people to reveal their true nature. Savannah Pierce destroyed herself more completely than I ever could have managed. I simply provided the stage for her performance. I closed the journal and placed it in the drawer next to the others, volumes that chronicled business victories, personal triumphs, and the gradual building of a life worth protecting. This particular story would stand as a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what we build, but from what we preserve. 6 months later, I received an invitation that made me smile. Marcus was engaged again, this time to Sarah Chin, a pediatric surgeon he'd met at a medical charity fundraiser. She was intelligent, accomplished in her own right, and most importantly, she treated others with the kind of genuine kindness that couldn't be faked or taught. When I met her for the first time over lunch at the country club, she thanked me for raising such a thoughtful son and apologized for being nervous about meeting the legendary Alicia Harlow. Legendary? I asked, amused. Marcus told me you're the strongest woman he knows, she said simply. Someone who protects the people she loves without compromise. I liked her immediately. Their wedding was a smaller affair than Marcus's first. Only family and close friends, held in the garden of my estate among the roses that William and I had planted decades ago. Sarah wore a simple but elegant dress and her grandmother's pearls, and when she promised to love and honor my son, I believed every word.
There was no cake incident this time.
Just two people who genuinely loved each other, surrounded by people who genuinely loved them. As I watched them exchange vows under the rose arbor, I thought about the different paths that had led to this moment. Savannah's cruelty had taught Marcus to value genuine kindness. Her greed had shown him the importance of finding someone who loved him for himself rather than his bank account. Her public meltdowns had demonstrated the value of grace under pressure. In destroying herself, she had inadvertently led him to exactly the kind of woman he deserved. The irony was perfect. During the reception, as I watched Marcus and Sarah dance to the same song he and Savannah had chosen for their first dance, I felt a profound sense of completion. The wound that had been opened on that terrible night 2 years ago had finally healed, leaving behind not a scar but wisdom. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the newlyweds had left for their honeymoon in Tuscany, I sat alone in my garden with a glass of champagne. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance perfuming the warm summer air, and the stars were brilliant overhead. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I hope you're happy with what you've done. You destroyed my life. Savannah. Even now, unable to accept responsibility for her own choices. I deleted the message without responding and put my phone away. Some people never learn that actions have consequences, that character determines destiny, that the seeds we plant inevitably determine the harvest we reap. I raised my glass to the night sky, to the memory of my beloved William, and to the future that stretched ahead, a future where my family's legacy was secure, where my son was truly happy, and where I could finally rest in the knowledge that I had protected what mattered most. To patience, I whispered into the darkness. And to the understanding that the best revenge isn't always dramatic, sometimes it's simply allowing people to become exactly who they've always been. The roses nodded in the gentle breeze, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out across the estate that had witnessed so much history, so much love, and so much carefully orchestrated justice. I finished my champagne and went inside, turning off the lights one by one until only the stars remained to witness the perfect ending to an imperfect story. After all, some chapters close themselves. And that, beautiful souls, is how I learned that true power isn't about fighting back. It's about having the patience to let others reveal who they really are. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced someone who underestimated your strength or tried to diminish your worth, remember this: your story isn't over. You have more chapters to write, more victories to claim, and more wisdom to gain. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every woman deserves to remember her own power. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person they never believed you could be. Until next time, this is Alicia Harlow, reminding you that elegance is the ultimate revenge, and patience is the sharpest weapon of all.